You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Is Canada's commitment to human rights real? We'll talk to Farid Khan, founder of Canadians United Against Hate, about a press conference they held in Parliament last week. But first, some news headlines. 8 teenage girls charged with second-degree murder. RCMP confirms documents sent to Muslim Association of Canada fake. New Brampton Mosque overnight debate. Taliban prohibits university education for women. And now the details. 8 teenage girls aged between 13 and 16 years have been charged with second-degree murder in Toronto, says police. The girls were involved in the stabbing of a 59-year-old man. So far, the police have not been able to determine if the girls knew the victim. Police say that the girls likely met through social media. Their identities are also not being revealed under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. According to Detective Sergeant Terry Brown of Toronto's Police's Homicide Unit, 3 of these girls had previous contact with police. Investigators are calling the incident a swarming, which means selecting a target to victimize. Police are asking witnesses to come forward. The RCMP has confirmed Tuesday that reports allegedly sent from the Canada Revenue Agency and the Mounties to the Muslim Association of Canada, or MAC, are fake. The reports insinuate that the RCMP and the Revenue Agency were aiming to prove, using paid informants, that MAC was involved in terrorism funding. The CRA has also determined that the documents are fake. MAC says the RCMP's response, quote, does not rise to the level of thoroughness necessary given the circumstances. They call on the federal government to have an independent investigation, something the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, appears open to. Brampton's city planning staff have a lot of work to do in the next few weeks. That's because 649 people, instead of the usual 12, showed up to a planning meeting. They were discussing the development of a new mosque in Brampton's East End. The staff must summarise the public input and make a recommendation to Brampton's council. After a low voter turnout in October's election, the mayor and councillors were happy that so many citizens came to express their views. Council allowed everyone to speak, and the meeting lasted until 4 a.m., likely one of the longest meetings in Brampton's history. Afghanistan's Taliban rulers have banned university education for women nationwide, provoking condemnation from around the world. Despite promising a softer rule when they seized power last year, the Taliban have ratcheted up restrictions on all aspects of women's lives, ignoring international outrage. In a letter issued by the Taliban's Minister for Higher Education, all government and private universities are told to immediately suspend female education until further notice. Melanie Joly, Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs, calls the decision an, quote, outrageous violation of the rights to education for every woman and girl. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was deeply alarmed by the ban, said his spokesman Tuesday. And that's it for the news. International Human Rights Day was celebrated on December 10th. December 10th is the date in 1948 that the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A collection of human rights groups attended a press conference organised by Canadians United Against Hate last week. They had several calls to action for the Trudeau government. To talk to us about their main messages and calls, we are joined by Farid Khan, founder, Canadians United Against Hate. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. You organised a press conference. Please tell us about why you wanted to organise a press conference for this December 10th commemoration of human rights.
Yes, well, this is something that we were doing before COVID-19 shut us down, and we decided to return. I believe that it's very important to mark Human Rights Day. Canada sees itself as a human rights champion. It claims to stand up for human rights, but if you look at the Canadian record, that's far from the truth, because the Canadian government seems to only stand up for human rights when it's politically expedient, whether it's talking about human rights overseas or whether we're talking about human rights, charter rights, and civil liberties in Canada. So we felt it was very important to mark this day and to touch on issues of charter rights in Canada, as well as a number of international human rights situations related to what's China is doing to the Uyghurs, what the Indian government is doing to Muslims in that country, and what's been happening to Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli government for decades.
We'll have a chance, I hope, to get more into those exact particular issues. But I just want to ask you a little bit more about the actual press conference. It looked like it was taking place in a very official place. Can you tell us where it was and who was there?
Yes, the media conference took place in Parliament, in the Parliament buildings, in the media studio there. The people who were in attendance and who spoke, other than myself, were NDP Member of Parliament Heather McPherson, who's their foreign affairs critic, Saleha Farouk from Justice for All Canada, Thomas Woodley, who is the president of Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, Qayyum, oh, forgive me, I forget his last name, but he represented the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, and Qayyum Masimov, and also Professor John Packer, who is the director of the Human Rights Center at the University of Ottawa.
To have a press conference in the Parliament building, is that something that everybody can organise, or you have been networking and working in this space for a long time so that you had good connections?
Well, anybody can do it as long as they get a member of Parliament or a senator to sponsor them. So in this case, we approached Heather McPherson's office. I became aware of her when I saw a video of her speaking in Parliament, very forcefully on issues of human rights, where she talked about the human rights of a lot of different groups, but she did focus her attention and part of her remarks on what's happening to Palestinians. And I thought that she would be a very good person to partner with, and they agreed to help us do this media conference.
Mm-hmm. And then you networked with the others, and Salia, who we interview on the show regularly, talked about India, oppression of Muslim minorities and what's going on in Kashmir. And the two gentlemen talked about Palestinian issues with the Israeli government. You talked in general, and I'll get to you in a minute. And then you had, you said, I think it was Masuma, for talking about the Uyghur situation.
Yes.
Was there a common theme that ran through all of these presentations?
Well, yes, the thread that connected us all was not just talking about human rights, but also talking about the fact that Canada has a very sorry record when it comes to standing up for human rights internationally or taking action to defend human rights and civil liberties at home against the actions of provincial governments who use the notwithstanding clause of the Charter of Rights to override rights in Canada. Mm-hmm. So basically, the general call was that Canada has to do a lot better. Canada just can't, be standing up in front of a camera or a microphone. Canadian government officials can't be doing that and saying, yes, we're defenders of human rights, and this is atrocious happening in what's happening in China or India or what have you, and yet not take action to address very serious human rights issues where not only are rights being violated, but crimes against humanity and genocide are being committed, and yet Canada is taking no decisive action to address those issues or taking action to penalize governments or entities that are committing these human rights violations.
And is that why in your opening remarks you called Canada's commitment to protecting human rights phony?
Yes, it is, because for years now, we've been seeing Canadian government officials and the Prime Minister talk about their support for the international rule of law and standing up for human rights. But let's just take a few examples. With the Uyghurs, there was a vote in Parliament to declare the China is doing to the Uyghurs as genocide. And frankly, what China is doing is following the Nazi Germany playbook. They've got internment camps. They are murdering people to harvest their organs. They are using slave labor, Uyghur slave labor, to make products. And yet, not only did not a single cabinet minister vote, there were some who weren't even in the House when the vote took place. And so, officially, Canada has no position. Yes, they've spoken about it in passing about how horrific it is, but they've done nothing. With India, they are pursuing a free trade agreement with a government whose leader admires Hitler. The supporters of the BJP party of Narendra Modi are admirers of Hitler, and Mein Kampf is, in a sense, their Bible in terms of how to deal with Muslims in that country. And with respect to Israel, Israel has been oppressing and persecuting and committing human rights atrocities against Palestinians since the country was created. And the Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch put out reports saying it was an apartheid state, as well as Israeli-based human rights group B'Tselem, which called Israel a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And yet in all these instances, the Canadian government is either just, issuing talking points and political platitudes, or, as in the case of Israel, it's utterly silent.
One of the speakers, and unfortunately I forget, maybe it was the professor, talked about how human rights had to become a principle that sometimes you might have to give up something for, perhaps, let's say, not sign the trade deal, in order to make human rights a centerpiece of your foreign policy. Is that, did I understand correctly? Like, is that the message that the groups were trying to put out?
Well, yes, because human rights have to be sacrosanct. You can't deal with a regime or a government that is violating the basic fundamental rights of people under its control. And, if Canada is going to talk the talk of being a human rights champion, then it has to walk the walk. And sometimes that requires us to, hurt a little by not signing a trade deal or taking a political hit on the international stage. Frankly, the state of human rights internationally is abysmal, given what's happening, whether it's China, India, Israel, or what's happening in Russia to LGBTQ2 people, or what's happening in certain African countries to Christians. There is human rights violations happening on every continent, and in some instances, it's not just violations and violence, but it's literally genocide, the targeting of a people as a group because they are in some way different. And yet Canada chooses to do business with some of these entities. I think it's I think that's hypocrisy on a level I can't even define.
Well, it seems like a cliffhanger, and we need a second show to talk about what Canada actually could do instead of what it's not doing, but we're out of time. But thank you for joining us and giving us this little glimpse.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope we can have a further discussion on this in the future.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe, and God bless.